Hello and welcome to another panel discussion. I'm David here with Renee, Ned, Joe, and once again, Dallas Jenkins, the director of The Resurrection of Gavin Stone. Hey. We have now seen the movie, so we can finally discuss it.
Yeah.
You all gave me higher than 80%, so I can gladly come on and without any fear.
Oh yes.
So you messaged me a while back, having seen our review. Were there any things in our review that stood out to you that you wanted to, off the bat, address or comment on?
Yes, I did actually. Obviously, it was pretty long. It was like 35 minutes or so. But there were multiple comments that were made that I found to be quite moving, not because you liked the film, but because of some of the topics that you guys picked up on from the movie that you discussed. And then Renee made a couple of comments I'm going to get to in a minute that made me both impressed and depressed at the same time.
Renee.
I have that kind of effect.
And Renee doesn't depress people very often, so.
I know. I'm looking forward to addressing that in just a second. But I'm just going to go through them real quick. First of all, Ned had made a comment about how he was impressed/moved by the conversion scene and how it was done artistically.
Conversion scene was really artistically well done. That part comedy was actually a little bit surprising for me.
That really meant a lot to me because pretty much one of the main rules of a faith-based film is that there's a conversion scene, at least in the segment of faith-based films that are made for the war room crowd, the God's Not Dead crowd, kind of typically these tend to be moms who I think seem to be the main market of the faith-based crowd that have been the most supportive consistently. And so there tends to be, if you don't have a conversion scene of some kind, there's disappointment. Mm-hmm. And so I have said, okay, since I'm making a faith-based film, it's a conscious decision to include it, so I'll do that, but I'm only going to do it if it's done in a unique way. And in all of my films, I've tried to come at it from a different perspective. So it meant a lot that Ned noticed that and commented on that, that it wasn't just the typical Protestant way of doing conversion scenes, which is words, all words. Right. And Catholics do a really great job of imagery and metaphor and I think art, quite frankly. I think some of the best Christian art of the last 1,000 years has been done primarily by Catholics. Protestants seem to be more comfortable with words. Renee made some comments about being angry at Gavin, and that she still hadn't quite forgiven him by the end of the movie.
It just kind of grinded my gears the whole time. This girl was like, wow, I actually might be thinking of a future with this guy. And meanwhile, he's just being a total liar. And I'm like, oh, you're so horrible. I'm still trying to forgive him. It might take me some time, but
you'll get there.
We'll get there.
The reason I found that to be interesting was because that's what I intended. I was somewhat frustrated in test screenings by how much people liked Gavin right away. We tried to set up the fact that Gavin and Kelly, the two main characters, are both likable, but both need to learn a lot. And most faith-based films, I think the Christian character tends to be almost perfect, and the outsider has a long way to go. And we tried to make Kelly actually somewhat difficult in the first half of the film, intentionally pulled her hair straight back, made her wear clothes. Everything was tucked in, everything was formal. She was very, in many ways, cold and a little bit distant. And she had a lot to learn about grace, just like Gavin had a lot to learn about grace. So I wanted their journeys to be similar, even though they were coming from drastically different perspectives. But what ended up happening was people liked Gavin a lot and didn't like Kelly very much. And if there was a common criticism of the film, one of it was, well, I didn't like Kelly until the end. And that frustrated me because I was like, he's a jerk. He's bald-faced lying, which the audience knows. And number one, but number two is, give her a little bit of credit. She's been working really hard on this production for 15 years and loves her church and loves her friends. And he's just coming in and trying to change it all. And he happens to be right about a few things. But I just felt like maybe it's a sexist thing. I don't know. But there was just a lot more grace towards him than there was towards her. And I liked hearing Renee say that she was ticked off at him, and that when he actually admitted, I don't want to give too much away because, as we know, the movie didn't do all that well at the box office, so there's a lot of more people who still need to see it, hopefully, on DVD. But, of course, everyone, I think, knows at the beginning of the movie, eventually he's going to get caught in his lie, and reveal that he's not a Christian. And that's devastating to her, because for the first time in several years, she kind of opens her heart up to him and then finds out, I guess I shouldn't have, he was lying all along. So anyway, again, I appreciated that you didn't appreciate him very much. I have a few people who are on the crew of the movie who saw what you said about extras.
About what?
About the extras.
It's a really great film, but I still felt like I was on sets, different sets, and there were extras walking through, and I really, really felt the set and the extras. I wasn't like immersed in the environment very much.
Yeah.
I think
feel
you were talking about like there were some scenes where just like there would be this one extra that would walk by and it would just like point out it to you. I think it's the scene where he's talking to his agent on the phone.
that one.
Scene.
It's just like the absolute perfect extra. He's got his coffee and his phone, and he's kind of like rushing through, and it's just like
It's supposed to make it a little more natural.
The extra
But
watches
it's
this
just
review.
like-
He's like, "Oh no, I screwed up my film."
I was the one on, while we were making the movie, who kept saying, it doesn't matter, no one notices, it doesn't matter.
I'm sorry, I have this problem where I just can't
No.
do it.
Here's the best part. Here's the best part that's coming. First of all, you were making a comment about sex, and I will say that I understand why you were talking. Your comment was it felt like we were in different sets. Now, we were actually shooting in my church. None of those things were sets, but leaving that aside, we did have a hard time because we're a lower budget film getting extras. You get professional extras typically on bigger budget movies. You hire them and you pay them, and
Of course.
and they know what to do. And we were working with a lot of just church members, so in many ways they did look like our church because they were people from our church. But one of the things that you said was, like, there was this one scene in the movie where this guy's walking down the hall by himself and he's carrying his coffee, and it just felt like, oh, we need to put an extra here.
The perfect extra.
And he was very like energetic too. You can see he was really hyped. Yeah.
Well, here's why. He actually won an auction to be an extra in the movie.
Oh, see, he was hyped. He was very excited. About
Wow.
They actually paid money to donate towards our school's drama department. And so in exchange for the donation to the drama department, he got a scene, and I promised that he would get, whoever donated the most would get this part and would get a scene of walking down.
Wow.
So absolutely, you were 100% correct. It was a total setup. It was the perfect extra.
that. Okay.
And I couldn't, as I'm watching, I'm literally going, oh my.
Gotcha. Oh.
It was as if you knew exactly what we were doing, and I kept saying, don't worry, no one cares about extras, no one will notice, it'll be fine. And you were literally pointing out every scene in the movie where I was saying, don't worry.
Oh.
And then the one or couple scenes where you said, oh, this was actually pretty good, were the scenes where I had the least to do with it. And they were like, look, we got a bunch of people here. I'm like, oh, fine, it doesn't matter anyway. So major props to you for noticing that which I thought no one would notice.
Coffee Guy has quite the extensive backstory.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought you'd appreciate that. So you also mentioned that one of the scenes that felt the most spontaneous to you in terms of the background was when Gavin first shows up at church in his church uniform. I actually made a video, like a 1-minute video of Gavin Stone taking us through the perfect Protestant church uniform, the pleated khakis and the short
I saw
sleeves.
that,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that scene is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, one of my favorite scenes that I've ever written. You guys seem to like it. But you mentioned that the extras actually seemed somewhat surprised by some of the things he was saying. That's because they were. That was actually our church staff. We shot that. We have a staff of about 400 people. And we just had them have a big staff meeting that morning. And so we just kind of had them spread out throughout the church lobby. And he walked in. And we didn't tell them what he was going to say. In fact, there's a scene where he comes in. It's actually in the trailer, where he kisses this older woman on both cheeks. She had no idea he was going to do that.
Oh my God.
That is fantastic.
That is.
Her reaction is 100% genuine. And then he actually started ad-libbing a few things. He would walk up to people and say, blessings, peace be to you. And they had no idea he was going to say that. And then at one point he says, oh, look, we have the same book. Because they both have the Bible. And that was, he totally ad-libbed. I didn't even write that in the script. So
Wow.
anyway, that was a fun scene that you seemed to pick up on well. Then finally, again, I was really moved by the conversation you guys had for about the last 10 minutes of the video, which ended up being very little to do with the movie, but was kind of, I think, inspired by the message of one of the main messages of the movie, which was humility. And David talked about how his experience just on YouTube, and just the notion of everyone wanting to pwn everyone else.
There's more of an emphasis on just intellectual ponage than there is on actually making a personal connection with people.
Yeah, that what
And-
you just said just made me cringe like so much.
That's what I see
It's
so
made
much.
Catholic YouTube so toxic.
At the end of the day, this movie is about a character's redemption. I mean, it's in the title, The Resurrection of Gavin Stone. And any good movie ends with the character at a very different place than he began. And so two things needed to happen in this story for me. One, Gavin had to have a spiritual awakening of sorts. He needed to go from being someone who was very, very far from God to communing with God in some way. And that presented its own set of challenges. How do you get to a place where someone is willing to do that? It's very hard to capture on screen, which is why most faith-based movies, including my own, struggle in many ways. How do you capture something that's in many ways, well, in the ultimate way, supernatural and mysterious and inward in a visual medium? But secondly is just in his personality. He goes from a total narcissist to someone who is regretting that, learning humility, learning submission, learning to be someone in an environment in which he's not typically comfortable because he's used to being the center of attention. And so, anyway, I just really was moved and wanted to commend you guys on where that conversation went. It, like I said, it ended up having little to do with the movie itself. But the reason I love your guys' videos is because they're never just about the thing you're talking about. They're about something much deeper. And that is ultimately the life of a Christian, Catholic or Protestant. As we go through this world, we have the surface that we walk on, and then there's what in movies we refer to as the subtext, but in life we refer to as, I think, ultimately the spiritual and the mysterious, which is, it's never just about the thing that we're doing. It's about so much more than that. It's about the eternal perspective. And so that you guys picked up on that in the movie, it is much more than a comedy. It's much more than a romantic comedy. It's much, much more than just a movie. And that's why the reaction to the movie from those who've seen it has been what's mattered the most, even though not as many people ended up seeing it in theaters as we hoped or expected. We do hope that the life of this movie is ultimately long and ultimately has an eternal impact, which is what we've heard already, is people like yourselves who I think were impacted in a way, not necessarily life change, but perhaps a different perspective, but then also those who are now coming back to church when they haven't been for years because of the movie, those who have actually accepted Christ because of the movie. That's ultimately what it's about, and that's ultimately what our lives are about. So I just wanted to express that and my appreciation.
Well, I'm so glad. I mean, yeah, absolutely. As you say, even though I think you mentioned the last 10 minutes may not have had to do with the movie specifically, I think that was the reason why the movie meant a lot to some of us, where it's like a movie can really have an impact when it really touches you on something that happened in your own life and you can relate to it, where the emotions that are brought out in the movie, you can see something in a different perspective. You can either relate to something the character has done, or you can see a character doing something that's maybe not so great that you've perhaps done in your own life, and it's sort of like a look in the mirror moment. It's like, oh, this is how it looks from an outside perspective. Perhaps I need to change.
Someone once said, do you want an audience to ultimately identify the most with the main character, make your main character an outsider? Because everyone has been an outsider at some point. I'm sure, Ned, when you talked about your love of wrestling, that there were probably environments in which that was considered nerdy or obsessive.
Very.
And yeah, and then someone like me, who had zero connection to wrestling, didn't care about it at all until I got to know Shawn Michaels. And I've been in environments because of Shawn and because of this movie where I'm an outsider, where I have no idea what I'm talking about in this world, and I wanted to know more about it. And you end up always finding out more about yourself when you're in a different world. And what I wanted to communicate in this movie was that not only was Gavin Stone impacted by being a fish out of water, the church was impacted as well. They learned something from him, and I think many times we Christians take things for granted. We take grace for granted because maybe it's been a long time since we experienced it in a radical way, because maybe our conversion experience was years ago. So we've lost sight of the fact, or we forget about the fact that grace still happens every day. And so that's what I was hoping the movie would communicate. And I think by making the movie about an outsider, we can all identify with it in some way.
One thing that I wanted to take a moment to thank you for was the scene. We talked about it in the review, but something that really meant a lot to me was the scene where Shawn Michaels and Gavin Stone are in the repair shop, and the lady comes by, sees the car, it's all fixed and everything, and he asked, are we going to go over there? He's like, no, we don't want the credit. That was particularly special to me because that's a point where I think, you were talking about how, Catholics have like a lot of the imagery. When I look at that scene, I'm just like, there are so many Catholics in our world, in our church that need to learn from this, from you guys, from Protestants, that this aspect of the movie is so important. And I mean, I've seen other Christian movies that I kind of like actually have enjoyed, but when they went back and said, oh, this, we're not going to take too much of the credit for this. Later on, they get, kind of earthly rewarded in some way, but there was no earthly reward after this. This was, there was nothing like that. That meant a lot to me because it focused on the eternal reward. That really said a lot to me about the movie itself and where it was going. So I really, really appreciate that part in the movie particularly. So I did really want to thank you for that because it's an example of how, we can learn from each other, even if we have any differences. We do have stuff we can learn from each other, and that was a very beautiful thing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that scene, along with a few other scenes, comes from starting at the end of the movie. Okay, here's where I want the character to end up. What are some of the things that would get him closer to understanding who Jesus was and what Christians are supposed to be in their pursuit of righteousness, which they'll, of course, unlikely to attain perfectly this side of heaven, but will at least pursue some level of righteousness, holiness, sanctification, sainthood. And one of those things is humility. And one of those things is absolutely realizing that you don't do things for the temporal reward. And Shawn Michaels, one of the things he appreciated about that character was his whole life and his career has been about being introduced to tens of thousands of fans freaking out. I mean, he is one of the more beloved, publicly beloved people ever in terms of, you can watch on YouTube dozens of times where 50,000 plus people went crazy as he walked into a room. And yet he's also one of the more humble, down-to-earth guys you'll ever meet, particularly because of Christ. And so for him, that scene, I think, was poignant as well. And then, of course, poignant for the character.
So one thing that I had wanted to ask you, since you were the director of the film, and since I had watched the sort of behind-the-scenes production videos, where oftentimes you're talking about all the stress each night of planning out just where everybody's going to walk the next day and all the shots and worrying about everything and how it's going to turn out. It's something I can relate to as well. I mean, even as we're having this interview, I'm worried about, is the mic rolling? Is the camera rolling? Is everything going? But there's also many scenes in the movie where it's sort of a meta thing of a production where Gavin Stone is also working on a production, and he's trying to, have all the bells and whistles and everything. But several times he's reminded, no, there's a more important message we're trying to focus on. Jesus wasn't all about spectacle and like, I am the Omega. So I was wondering, how do you balance, I guess, keeping in mind the overall goal while at the same time, balancing trying to get everything right and looking as good as possible on a production level?
I think that if you've done the work beforehand, then the shooting becomes a lot easier. So one of the things that I do is kind of the heart and soul and message of the movie is thought and prayed about the most during the script writing process. Then while you're shooting the movie, hopefully you can be more focused solely on the logistics. You don't want to be completely distracted by that, but at the end of the day, you've got 4 weeks, in my case, which is very short, but 4 weeks to shoot the film, and it's going to live forever. So if you get too caught up in rethinking the themes and obsessing about the meaning of the film, if you haven't thought of that beforehand, then in many ways you could be so focused on that you forget that the lights need to turn on and the mics need to work and the cameras need to be rolling. But as a director, my job, the best description of a director I've ever heard was that the director is the immune system for the film. So you've got all these departments that are all wanting their way, and your job is to make sure that none of them individually get their way. So the audio guy, if it was up to him, would have all the actors to stand around a microphone and speak into the microphone. And if it was up to the cinematographer, there would be no microphones. It would just, the actors would stand perfectly still in this perfectly composed shot, and they wouldn't move. If it was up to the actors, they just wander around and wouldn't care about microphones or lights. So my job is to keep all of those things in mind and allow in only the things that are good for the film and good for the other departments and keep out what isn't. So ultimately, your question is about the director's job. Mm-hmm. The best directors are skilled at having a little bit of attention deficit disorder, a little bit of being able to keep multiple things in their head at once. Whether or not I'm a good director is up for debate, but I definitely have attention deficit disorder. And I'm definitely able to think of a lot of different things at once, even though my wife doesn't necessarily always believe me. But I do my best to do that. So yeah, but at the end of the day, honestly, and I'll make this quick, each morning of that day, I am still consciously thinking, my ultimate purpose is eternal. My ultimate purpose is to be Jesus to someone that I come in contact with, even though I am a professional and am trying to have a professional set. But again, long story short, a lot of that meaning, spiritual, emotional, intellectual stuff has been done in the months or years leading up to the moment when it's like, all right, day one, here we go, roll camera. Now it's time to be a little bit more of a technician.
So what were your impressions when you first saw the Rotten Tomatoes score?
Oh.
Well, it was actually better than I expected. Most faith films lie somewhere between 5 and 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. We got a 42% from critics. Not a lot of critics actually even saw the film. Those who did see the film, most of them saw it on a laptop from a link. I would have preferred to not have it be that way.
Yeah.
I really, truly mean this when I say it. I'm not bothered by negative reviews, nor am I overly moved by enthusiastic reviews. I do my best to know what it is that I've got, my strengths and weaknesses. I know what the movie is and what it isn't. It's just something that I've really prioritized in my career, is just be self-aware. Check yourself. Some of that comes from just age and experience, from showing the movie to so many people over my lifetime, the different movies that I've made. You start to pick up on when people mean what they say. So, after a screening, you can tell over time whether they really liked it or whether they didn't. And I'm just aggressively curious. So when something doesn't work in someone, I really try to find out why. Why didn't this work for you? And then I remember that. And I write that down. And I have a file of all the things that I'm trying to learn about myself and the film. So I wasn't bothered by the critics, the fact, occasionally they would say things that I thought weren't fair, like a couple of critics said, this movie claims to be a comedy, but no one's going to be laughing out loud. And I thought, how could you know that when you watched it on your laptop without a crowd? I've been in like 30 screenings of this movie, and without exception, all of them had at least 10 moments where they were all laughing very hard and laughing out loud. So I don't mind if you don't like the movie.
Yes.
That's kind of a weird thing to say. So some people just go into movies cynical. And again, that's not to excuse it. I mean, I think the movie works overall. I'm proud of it, but it's not for everybody. And that's true, I think, of a lot of films. But I really, and I think this is a good lesson for you guys and for anyone who's starting out in the arts or on YouTube or whatever it is that you're doing. Before you release it to the world, try to have a decent sense of what it is, so that you're not all that shocked and stunned by how people react. Whether that's bouncing it off of your friends and family and asking them for honest opinions, or ultimately, if we're truly living the life we're supposed to be living, we're doing this for the Lord before we're doing it for anyone else. And so not to overly spiritualize it, but if you truly believe that you're doing what is right and you're saying what you want to say, that's going to help you feel a little bit less upset when someone says something negative about it.
I was reading the book by the creator of VeggieTales, and he talked about how sometimes the reach of a project and how many people it impacts and stuff is great, in the eyes of God and everything, but at the end of the day, God cares about the person making it way more than who it reaches outside of that. And the creator of VeggieTales, in his circumstance, talks about how God took that away from him to save him. What I'm asking is, you did talk about how making this movie impacted your faith life. And I know you probably think that's a priceless thing you got out of making it, whether the movie did well or not, And so I just know there's a lot of young entrepreneurs out there working in Christian media and Catholic media like we are, and what would you tell them along those lines of working on the project? It's not the overall reach of the project, but it's like the journey and the progress that you make, because I guess what I'm saying is like God loves us enough, no matter like whether what we do is successful or not, if we had a good heart.
So on Friday, when we got the numbers in the early afternoon, we immediately knew from the distributor that it was really bad news. And I immediately could see the future, meaning some of the companies that were involved, who were involved in faith-based films for the first time, like WWE and Blumhouse, likely wouldn't go back to this well again, because this was their first time. So if it went badly, then they have other things like wrestling and horror films that they've had much more success in. So there's no reason for them to keep trying faith-based films. So on one hand, I was really upset and concerned. And then something really cool happened, and I'll make this story quick, but I think it applies to everyone. And I hope that, again, young people can learn this lesson early. But my wife was also very upset. I was at home, and we were just kind of in our own minds, and she just felt the Lord telling her very clearly, kind of pointing her towards the story of the feeding of the 5,000 in the Gospels. And so she read that story to me and noticed something about it that I've been a Christian my whole life and I hadn't really connected before, is that in the story of the feeding of the 5,000, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, these people are starving, they're famished, they haven't eaten in 3 days, we need to send them home to get food. And Jesus says, well, if we send them home, they're going to faint along the way, and so we can't do that. You have to bring me food now. And here's what's so interesting about it is Jesus, of course, knew, he'd been with them for 3 days, he knew the whole time that they would get to a place where 3 days had gone past and they had nothing left but a miracle, meaning the whole time he knew that they would get to a place where they needed a miracle. So then they were completely reliant on him. And later that day, I was in my own kind of private time with the Lord, and I randomly opened up my favorite devotional, and I accidentally opened it to the month of June, even though it was January. And the devotional for that day was about the feeding of the 5,000 and about the raising of Lazarus, and the same thing, how he had said to Lazarus' friends, you go roll the stone away. Jesus could have done a miracle and done it himself. But in the case of the feeding of the 5,000 and in the rolling of the stone and the ultimate raising of Lazarus, he had humans do everything that they didn't need him for, so that the only thing that was left was him to do a miracle. And then the next night, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm working on my kind of post-mortem about the film's opening. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, a Facebook message pops up from someone that I barely know. I talk to him once a year on Facebook. I've never even met him. And all it said was, your job isn't to feed the 5,000. Your job is only to bring your 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And I honestly had one of those like scared moments. I thought, did someone tell you something that I said to them? Like, I was almost freaked out. And he said, oh, I just felt God wanted me to tell you that. I'm in Romania right now. Which is why he got me at 4 o'clock in the morning. And all that to say, it was so clear to me, the Lord made it very clear to me really quickly, that you're only responsible for what he asks you to do. You're not responsible for what happens as a result of it. And it is the journey, not the destination, as cliche as that sounds. But Phil Vischer, who created VeggieTales, said something that impacted me tremendously, and I was reminded of it opening weekend of Gavin Stone, which is, where you are in 5 years is none of your business. And so often we get caught up in what our plans are, dictating our future, especially in college. You're thinking, what's my future? What's my future? What's my future? And I have really come to a place in my life where I genuinely, and I can truly say this, and I truly was able to say this opening weekend, I'm okay if I never make another movie. I hope that's not the case. It doesn't seem like it's the case because my passion is still there. But if I didn't, that would be okay too.
Yeah, that
and
echoes
that's a hard
Phil
place
Vischer.
to get to. But when you're there, you will finally understand the difference between joy and happiness. And joy is there whether you are happy or not.
Yes.
And I truly felt joy opening weekend. I really did. I understood what joy was because I'm like, wow, I'm in a really comfortable place. This is out of my hands. This is not my responsibility. Where I'm at in 5 years, how people react to the film. I did what I believe the Lord wanted me to do. The impact of those who've seen it has seemed to indicate that I was doing the right thing, at least in terms of the story I was telling. And maybe we made some bad business decisions. That's possible. Maybe we did. And clearly, the marketplace didn't respond financially in the way that we hoped. But, man, in 100 years, I'll be in heaven. In 100 years, no one's going to care what the opening weekend of Gavin Stone was. But there may be some grandchild of the person who emailed me and said, I'm in church and I've accepted Christ because of your film. And that, of course, matters infinitely more, literally infinitely more, than what the numbers were opening weekend.
Yes, and like you were just saying a little bit ago, if you're listening to God doing what he told you to do, it's that relationship going on right there. You listening, him telling you that that's enough for your whole life, no matter what happens, what you go through, what you end up doing. It's the strength of that relationship, and that Jesus, God himself, is joy. He is that joy that can be taken.
I think the cue that you may have missed something or done something wrong won't be in any kind of earthly response. It will be in that check in your spirit. Something will feel wrong to you when you go to pray, or when you are at church and you're worshiping, or whatever it is that's happening, and there's that glitch. That's what you should pay attention to much more than the financial return. If you feel that joy, then the happiness will wane depending on what happens, and that's not your responsibility.
Thank you so much. Yes.
One of the things, I think I mentioned this in the review, but one of the things I definitely appreciated about the Resurrection of Gavin Stone, well, of course I mentioned this, at the ending, was the artisticness of the movie. Because one of the things that makes a great movie is more showing, less dialogue. And I'm a big, show me, don't tell me kind of person. Some of my favorite movies to watch are silent films, because they are able to portray the true message of the movie by showing me and their actions and everything. And a lot of Christian movies nowadays, they do too much telling and not enough showing. There are so many other like big blockbuster movies that are coming out nowadays that there's either like lots of action, lots of dialogue, lots of stuff, and there's not enough artistic thought in the creation of the movie. And when I was watching Gavin Stone, I was just thinking of how much actual artisticness was put into the thought process of this movie, and you were using not only your heart but your artistic mind to portray the heart and the message of the movie. You can say to somebody that you love them constantly, but if you don't do anything, if you don't show it, that message is going to mean nothing. You were able to actually succeed in a great way by doing the show don't tell method.
Well, thank you very much. I actually believe I have a ways to go as a visual filmmaker.
Of course.
And I think that clearly, I think one of the issues people had in their decision to whether or not to see the movie in theaters was the movie, I think, in the marketing of it, and I think even in the filming of it. I mean, it was a relatively low-budget film. I don't know if it's fulfilled the current requirements for a theatrical movie.
Of course.
Nowadays, big movies are gobbling up the theatrical space because the smaller movies can be seen at home on their phones, and they don't feel like they're giving up a whole lot by not seeing it in the theater. Whereas for a Marvel film, if you don't see it in the theater, you're missing out on the spectacle.
Of course.
And so I do think that next time around, I'm going to hopefully be even better at capturing, I think, on a larger scale, the stories that I'm trying to tell. I don't know that that was right for this movie per se. I think this movie was kind of meant to be a smaller film.
Of course.
And that maybe the business decision of putting it in theaters was where the mistake was made. I don't know. Time will tell. But I appreciate you saying that, because I do think that, again, I think this is really true about Protestants and Catholics. I do think that Protestants are wordsmiths, and Catholics are much better at showing, not telling. There is much to learn from each other, I think.
Absolutely.
And not just Christian, non-Christian, but Catholic, Protestant. I want to be curious the rest of my life, and I want to understand other perspectives better. And so, again, it was meaningful to me when you guys reviewed the film that you picked up on a few things that maybe you don't always see in Catholic art, and I, of course, pick up on a few things, even in your comments, that I don't always pick up on in Protestant art or conversation.
But yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying about how it showed. And this movie in particular, like especially movies and artistry, it's very good to show. That's kind of one of the things when we were talking about in the panel, when it's just like you need to. Sometimes it's good to show, sometimes it's good to say. Movies and art in particular, that's the moment where you need to show. Because beauty can capture in what sometimes thousands of words cannot. But then there are those other times that, like the guy over Facebook messaged you words. He just the scripture passage just of the feeding of the 5,000. So kind of in a general term, I think that's kind of what I was talking about, is like as far as like in your everyday life. But definitely in this movie, yeah, showing was very important thing.
I think in God's Not Dead and in other Christian movies, it's hard to tell people, the big Christian message, the essence of evangelization is, telling people that Jesus loves them. And to put it into through actors is difficult sometimes when you have to be as real as possible with evangelization.
Right. I don't necessarily go into each film that I make with the express goal of this is going to bring someone to eternal salvation. I mean, that's something that is not really my job anyway. All I can do is point people to who Jesus is.
Scatter the seed, and where it lands, it lands.
Exactly. Or point people. In this case, I was trying to show. Again, I think if I had two audiences for this movie, one is the Christian who maybe has taken grace for granted. And two, the person who maybe is skeptical about church, either for reasons that are legitimate because they've given up on church after some bad experiences, or because they are only going by what they've heard. And neither of those things are necessarily intended as, at the beginning of this movie, someone is not going to be a Christian, and by the end of this movie, they are. Because like you said, it's very difficult to portray that through actors. And again, I don't know that you can predict, again, how God is going to use something. So I think a lot of Christian films, the goal kind of becomes paramount. The goal is to bring people to Christ. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And then many times they succeed. So who am I to ever criticize another film unless I believe that their intentions are impure? Otherwise, it's like, hey, maybe I didn't like it, but someone did. Who cares? And that's not up to me. And the same thing with my own films. I just genuinely have gotten to a place in my life, spiritually and intellectually, where I'm not responsible for the feeding of the 5,000. I'm only responsible for the loaves and the fish. Ned, you commented on Shawn Michaels, and you mentioned, I think, the video that I sent that's on YouTube. It ended up getting over 4 million views on social media, which is one of the coolest things about this project, in my opinion, was introducing a lot of the world, including the WWE world, to A, a faith-based film that didn't feel like a faith-based film, B, the story of Shawn Michaels, which I think a lot of WWE fans knew but didn't know the extent of it.
Yes.
And so your comments on Shawn Michaels and how he influenced you were really moving to me, because it was one of the main things I wanted to do in the last year. I not only made this movie, but I made that video. And to that end, I have a surprise for you that Dave knows about. We have a gift for you that I wanted to give you now. So David,
Oh my. Oh my. Oh dear. Oh my dear. Oh my dear goodness. Oh. I am a bit speechless, and first I must say thank you, and I'm going to go ahead and open this. Oh my goodness,
I am. You can see what it is first.
Yeah, of course. Oh,
actually, we don't know what it is either. We haven't opened it.
Oh,
so
well,
we're going to
course.
experience it with you.
Oh
Surprised he's
my.
opening it. Usually he's a collector.
Oh my. 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 Hold on. I need to recover for a sec. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
I am completely speechless at the moment. Oh my. Paws and whiskers.
Who wants to keep track of how many times he says oh my?
We'll have a counter of the oh my's in the corner.
Great, perfect.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, this means.
Hold it up.
Oh yeah, hold on. Okay.
Oh yeah, we haven't seen it, so I have the close-up angle
They don't
here.
even know what it is.
To Ned, thanks for supporting the movie. God bless Shawn Michaels.
Oh, I am I am truly, honored, blessed and honored, and all that other lovely very jazz right now.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Well, thank you
This is
so.
fantastic.
I feel very special about this because Shawn Michaels was such a huge influence on me and my faith life and everything, and to get this, I feel. Needless to say, extremely speechless at the moment.
Well, I actually sent him the video and said, go to the whatever minute mark it was where you told the story of how he influenced your life, and he responded and said, wow, I'm still blown away by how this wrestling world impacts people beyond just the wrestling. So he appreciated what you had to say, and then I sent him the picture along with the envelope so that he could just write a little note and send it to, I believe, your girlfriend. We've...
Of course, she knew about it. Oh my goodness gracious.
But thought you'd appreciate that. Anyway.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, of course.
I wanted to say thanks again for reaching out to us
Thank
both
you.
the
Yeah.
initial
Thank
time
you.
and
Yeah.
then
Thank
now.
you so much.
The conversations that we've had have meant a lot to us, and this is my favorite part of video production. It's the conversations that you get to have with people. It's so much more than just numbers or anything else. It's the interaction you can have. I wanted to also say thank you for connecting us with Tori Martin. We had no idea that would happen when we mentioned it in the review as well, that we just really enjoyed that scene. I had no idea he was a comedian and a writer, and that he also had a film coming out this March that he told us about. So
His book is I'm blanking on the name of it, but you guys can look it up. But it's really, really beautiful, and it's just his memoirs of living in Alaska, and it's really impactful and insightful, and he's just a really cool guy. So I was happy to pass on your comments about him because he did do a good job in the film.
Yes, you did.
All right, well, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it, and let's stay in touch.
Yes,
All right.
let's.
Absolutely.
thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you so
Have
much.
a great
Good,
evening.
God bless.
God bless.
Boss. Blessings. Peace be to you.
Blessings. Peace be to you. Now you know why I said that.
I almost cried.